Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is May 8, 2021, and in this video, we're going to watch a Jimmy Dore video and critique it, nothing too profound. Sometimes people get upset when I critique Jimmy Dore, to which I say, what really are you defending here in Jimmy Dore? Yeah, he's not the Young Turks, okay, but he has a particular kind of unprincipled politics that are just sort of anti-establishment and aren't really useful. They're all over the place, and that's kind of what we're going to be looking at here. The title of this video, as titled by Jimmy's people, is Trump Facebook Ban Stands as Liberals Cheer Censorship. I would really like to know Jimmy Dore's definition of liberal, because I don't see how he doesn't fall within that group. Anyway, it sounds from the title of this video like this is another one of Jimmy's just anti-censorship, blanket anti-censorship videos. As socialists, we know if we were to achieve power, we would use the state to mercilessly repress the bourgeoisie to prevent capitalism from reasserting itself. So censorship in and of itself is not necessarily an invalid political tool. It seems to violate Jimmy's sense of Americanism or whatnot, but, you know, when I've heard Jimmy speak on the subject in the past, he's usually quoting Noam Chomsky in support of, this idea that there should be no censorship whatsoever. Anyway, let's get into it and see what's going on.
Facebook ban on Donald Trump will hold social networks oversight board rule. They have an oversight board. Who picked them? Oh, the guys who run Facebook. This is like the cops are investigating themselves. Turns out they didn't commit any crimes. Hey, turns out Facebook's ban's cool. Who said Facebook?
So it's just a company policy. All the forced laughter here, I don't really get it. Like any company, they make decisions when challenged. Sometimes they review those decisions. Sometimes they revise them. Sometimes they don't. I'm no fan of Facebook. Socialism for All has been kicked off of Facebook several times. I understand the desire to use it. There is a large audience on Facebook you can reach with your message, etc. And we appreciate everyone who spreads Socialism for All videos onto there to reach the many people who are still in the not yet banned socialist, communist, and just generally left groups who are on there. But Jimmy's starting out with a pretty weak metaphor so far. I hope it gets better than this.
And by the way, there he is at a Ted Nugent concert. Here we go. Anyway, at the time of Mr. Trump's posts, there was a clear immediate risk of harm, and his words of support for those involved in the riots legitimized violent actions, the Facebook Oversight Board wrote in the announcement of its decision. Given the seriousness of the violations and the ongoing risk of violence, Facebook was justified in suspending Mr. Trump's accounts. Facebook created the Oversight Board to review the hardest calls it makes about what content it does and does not. Facebook created Facebook got some other guys from Facebook to confirm what they did was right.
Again, I don't find that in the slightest bit surprising. Who else would they turn to? It's their company. Who else would they turn to? It's a company policy. It's a company decision. Anyway, this just kind of boomer logic is kind of frustrating, I think. Thinking that private companies are somehow publicly accountable. They're not, and the confusion around that, I feel like, honestly, if you really kind of consider what that confusion reflects, it may say something about why U.S. politics and people's political outlooks are as screwed up as they are. But anyway, stepping beyond Jimmy's analysis for a moment, what is this about when they're talking about clear risk of harm, etc.? I think they're talking about that January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Okay, so the U.S. ruling class now has a problem in the MAGA Trump movement. Okay, the U.S. government ruling class, I mean, the government's just an institution. It's an implement of the ruling class. The U.S. ruling class has been courting nationalism whenever it has been convenient for it to do so. Capitalism often does this in order to try to shore up profits and, just keep people consuming as needed. The defense industries tend to be profitable and employ a lot of people. So these are ways that they can shore up their system. The MAGA movement, this has been building for a while. First, it was the Tea Party, etc. It serves both to contain and then redirect some organic outrage over the economic failings. I mean, particularly after 2008, the crash that wiped out a lot of people's savings, or at least reduced them considerably. I know people who lost half their savings in that. So they are making this astroturfed movement that is manipulated by the bourgeoisie to contain and then use people's outrage actually in support of the status quo at the end of the day through the manipulations of the bourgeoisie who control the puppet strings. However, there are times when movements like that can get out of control and certain sectors of the bourgeoisie can actually be upset by the outcome. Sometimes they go off in strange directions that do not support the actual overall plans of the bourgeoisie. Now, make no mistake, as socialists, we don't support MAGA, none of these right-wing populist movements. They are enemies of socialism, and they not only don't want the same things that we do, they would be violently opposed to us. But in any case, the MAGA movement and the Tea Party before it, that whole right-wing populist, kooky, crazy, proto-fascist, semi-fascist movement, they're trying to contain it, hem it in, put it on the shelf again, and try the Joe Biden approach to managing America. Inclusion, get the assimilation machine running a little bit better, etc. So here's this effort to put Trump back on the shelf, in part by denying him a place on Facebook. Will it work? Won't it? This is a larger question. Let's continue with the video. I think having put this in a better context.
That's with a straight face. I bet they were giggling when they wrote that, actually. What are their qualifications to be on the oversight board? I guess we'll never know. Are they aware we already have free speech laws? We'll never know. Facebook, following the ruling, will now determine an action that is clear and proportionate. Vice President of Global Affairs and Communications Nick Clegg said in a statement. Until then, he said, Trump's accounts will remain suspended. That guy sounds like he's more important than the president. Vice President of Global Affairs and Communications. That sounds really important.
Well, the biggest position at Facebook is just Prince of the World. That's Mark Zuckerberg's.
In a statement, Trump said Facebook, as well as Twitter and Google, had taken away his free speech. And why would you say that? Because the way people communicate now is like there was before the telephone, people used to have the Pony Express. And that was the quickest way you could communicate across distance, was the Pony Express. And then they invented the telephone. And then everybody got telephones. So then the telephone was seen as a utility, like it's something you had to have to live in the modern world, just like running water, clean and plumbing and sewage. Those are called utilities, right? Electricity, telephone, plumbing. Those are considered utilities because everybody's got to have them to live in the modern society. Well, now, in order to communicate in the modern society, you have to go on social network platforms.
Okay, so first of all, I have never had a personal Facebook account ever. I created one for Socialism for All. It's business, it's not personal. And I'm sure that things will go on just fine without it. It's not a utility. It's not currently treated as one. If it is ever treated as utility, we'll have that conversation then. It's not currently. So this point is moot. But beyond that, Jimmy is completely sidestepping the context of the January 6th riot at the Capitol. That is why this is happening. He's trying to make this a general discussion about free speech. Again, he cites free speech laws. That doesn't apply to private companies right now. So if you want to make some kind of a more focused, well-researched argument on that, go for it. This is just really thin, kind of dime store stuff. I guess it goes over well with his like boomer audience, but anyway, continuing.
That's how everyone communicates. Everyone, including the president, including news organizations, have their own social network accounts.
CIA.
The CIA has a social net. Everybody. That's the town square now, and we all know it. So those should be considered a utility, just like the telephone. Meaning you can't take away Trump's telephone because he says something nefarious on it. But now they're going to take away your right to speak in public without breaking any laws. Without breaking any laws. If he's broken some laws, then there's a Justice Department, they should prosecute them. They're not doing that. You know who's prosecuting them? Facebook. In a completely opaque way. Not transparent at all. There's no adversary. Trump wasn't allowed to present his case. There's no impartial judge. There's no...
Can I just say, who fucking cares? He is explicitly speaking on behalf of Trump right now. I don't fucking care. I don't care if Trump is not on Facebook. I'd prefer Trump doesn't talk to people. In my world, we would ruthlessly suppress Trump, and I'm not bothered by that in and of itself. This is not something that would change in my world at all. When Trump is talking, he's riling people up to ignorant, hate-filled actions. That's what Trump does. So I don't care. Facebook isn't a utility. In my world, Facebook wouldn't be Facebook. So all of this is moot. And Jimmy does raise the point of if he had broken some law, let them deal with that. Well, that's, I don't know where to begin on that one. They're trying to prevent the emergence of a fascist movement that possibly is not helpful to them. They don't mind it when they think it's useful to them. They seem to be fearing that what Trump is doing somehow is going to get out of control. So they're trying to limit him. Again, all of this analysis is completely lacking from the Jimmy Dore worldview. He sees it in simple terms of just right and wrong, free and unfree. That isn't how this works. We're in the middle of a vicious class war, and we need to adjust our analysis accordingly.
Nothing. Just a bunch of jagoffs handpicked by a billionaire. And Anna Kasparian and the Young Turks would say this is great. Even as they're being censored. They're all for oligarch censorship without due process. That's the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian, and Cenk Uygur. They're not for democracy. They're not for due process.
So I know this is a meme at this point, but democracy is when you allow fascists to speak, and the more fascists you allow to speak, the more democracy you have.
They're not for they're pro-censorship. And they're cheering this on. Stripping Trump of the ability to reach his 35 million Facebook. By the way, Bernie Sanders is against this. Just so you know, Bernie Sanders showed a little nutsack, and he's against this. I mean, he doesn't have to actually do anything or actually vote against it he doesn't have any. So it's easy for him to say this. So when it doesn't matter, Bernie Sanders could actually say something that's honest. And he said this was wrong. Stripping Trump of the ability to reach his 35 million Facebook followers and 24 million Instagram followers has stoked criticism that the tech company is biased against conservatives, a claim many on the right have made for years without evidence. I'm pretty sure this would be evidence.
So Jimmy has finally done it. He has crossed over into the Fox News territory of the communist liberal media is silencing our conservative voices. I'm somewhat speechless. Let me address the first point about Bernie Sanders standing up and saying it's wrong. I would not say that that indicates courage on Bernie Sanders' part, rather an utter lack of principle. Jimmy criticizes Bernie for not, quote, voting against it, although I thought we had established that this was not a government type of situation. So again, though, back to Jimmy's point where he closes with, well, at least I cut him off at, this is evidence that Facebook is biased against conservatives. Hey, raise your hand if you've ever used Facebook and seen clear bias against the left and in favor of conservatives. In fact, those are, I think the majority of people still on Facebook are like old racist boomer MAGA people. That's the majority of who is left on there. Most of the progressive people have gone to Twitter or some other platform. There's not that much going on Facebook at this point. I have run a story on this channel called Facebook equals Fashbook ? Where we covered the far right corporate governorship of Facebook. It's demonstrable. There's Republican activists running it. It's just that the Trump phenomenon, again, Jimmy is completely excluding so far the whole January Capitol riot incident, which is, I believe, what this is about in the first place. He's conveniently ignoring that, bordering on a lie by omission. So he's finally done it. He's crossed over into, the liberal socialists are going to take our, whatever, free speech, etc.
What? Without evidence? I've got tons of evidence, NPR, you fucking bullshitters. I've got tons of evidence that NPR are straight up liars. Here's some of it right here.
Right.
That the right wing has no evidence that Facebook is biased? Well, right there, that's just a straight up lie. And that shows you how establishment media works. NPR, Facebook, the Biden administration, Silicon Valley, they're all in the same cabal.
I wonder at this point how many months it is until Jimmy unveils an Alex Jones style conspiracy pyramid diagram where the Bilderbergers and it's all connected.
Right, The company's policies and lack of transparency have led to widespread confusion and contributed to the suspicion of bias, the board co-chair said at a press conference shortly after the decision.
So I'm just going to comment on that line. This is not Jimmy's line. This is the NPR statement that the company's policies and lack of transparency have led to widespread confusion and contributed to suspicions of bias. Okay, let's think about who we're talking about. We're talking about Trump people, just right-wing crazies. These people are not known for their critical thinking. They are known for their constant assertions of wannabe victimhood, etc. They're characterized by willful ignorance, put into motion in every way that they can muster. Just basically their participation in civic life consists of running around screeching abuse at other people who don't immediately recognize their inherent supremacy just because they are white conservatives, oftentimes Christians. So that's who we're talking about. These people don't need a reason to be confused, and they don't need a reason to be suspicious. That's their default mode. You could call it defining traits. This is who Jimmy's standing up for now. Is it time to jump ship? Yeah, it's time to jump ship, folks.
It hasn't led to widespread confusion. We're not confused about what's happening. We know what's happening. Facebook is censoring shit that the intelligence community tells it to censor. That's what's happening. We're not confused about it. There's a lack of transparency. Why? Why? Because that's what's happening. And why wouldn't they want to be transparent if it was all on the up and up? Because it's not on the up and up. When you do not have clarity, consistency, and transparency, there's no way to know, he said. And much of the reason for demanding consistency and transparency is so that this can be revealed. The panel, which is funded by Facebook through a $130 million independent trust, is currently made up of 20 experts.
Oh, boy.
We've debunked those experts on the regular here. They said we were lying. They flagged one of our news reports about the vote counting in the Iowa, and we said the DNC was nefariously sticking their fingers in it. They flagged it as fake news. Turns out that, of course, it was revealed by an investigation that was exactly what was happening.
Yeah. So let me step in here again, because when I was running the S4A Facebook page, which is where this channel got started, some of my posts got flagged as well, for the same reasons, including that very same example of the Buttigieg shadow app and all that stuff. Well, yeah, Buttigieg, in addition to being an insider in the Democratic Party, is friends with the Facebook heads, etc., and that was marked as fake news. Okay, that was one of the things that contributed to the strikes against S4A that brought it down. But let's be clear about something that Jimmy is not being clear about. There's a difference between people who are fighting against the entire system and people who are just fighting for a faction of the bourgeoisie within it. In other words, socialists, and I'm not including Jimmy Dore in that group, socialists and Trumpers are not the same. Facebook might treat us both badly, but we are not fundamentally the same. Trump, MAGA, the Tea Party, the birthers, that whole ball of shit that they represent, that is effluent from the system, that the system sometimes trots out when it finds it useful. Other times, it suppresses it, keeps it back on the shelf. They are the rabid dogs that the system unleashes as berserkers to go out and terrorize the rest of us so that we don't get organized when the system feels a need to do that. So the oppression, unqualified and blanket oppression that they give to us, because we're against their entire system, is not the same. It's not motivated by the same things as what is done to the MAGA people. So Jimmy's grade school characterization here of this situation is just one of censorship, is fundamentally wrong in key ways. Let's continue.
So we've debunked their fucking fact checkers. Their fact checkers are propagandists, and the NPR are propagandists. Why? Because they're funded by the Koch brothers and the Archer Daniels Midland and the military-industrial complex and Walmart and fucking Bank of America. That's who funds NPR, the people they're supposed to be exposing. So 20 experts from around the world are on this panel, including specialists in law and human rights and several journalists. Who are they?
Experts.
Editor's note, Facebook is among NPR's financial supporters.
Well, it gets better, too. I mean, because, I've been reading up on this today. There was a Vox article that also this panel of experts also said that at the end of the day, it's just kind of Facebook's decision. Like, they're basically like, yeah, we're cool with this. And by the way, we don't even really, it's basically Facebook's decision. And that's the problem here. And
why is this the problem? And I guess what I'm saying is, in this system, why would it be any other way? And if it's going to be some other way, how are you going to get it from what it is now to that way? Like, this sort of impotent finger wagging and complaining. Yeah, but this is the system that basically you support, and you'd maybe like to add Medicare for all to it and some other vague things, like maybe you want Bitcoin, depending on who your guest is, who might be paying you for airtime or whatever. Like, you might have these other little tweaks you want to do to it, but this is the system. These are the consequences of the system. If you want to stand up for another system, we can have a different conversation at that point. But this is how it works. If you look at history and the history of social change and revolution, it takes quite a great deal to affect anything different. So I just don't know what people are going to get out of this, except more of that frustrated feeling and, feeling of just carrying around the weight of the world on your shoulders and this feeling of doom and negativity that seems to plague a lot of progressives and social democrats who, at the end of the day, hitch their wagon to the bourgeoisie's system and then just kind of complain about the consequences.
We've been talking about this for years now, and the theme remains the same. It's you have the Silicon Valley plutocrats just deciding what is and isn't permissible. There's no process. And look, I've been saying the same thing, whether it's Donald Trump or Alex Jones or whoever it is. Look, if they violated free speech laws, I'm fine with them being deplatformed. Did they? I don't know, but I'm not qualified to make that call. You know who else isn't qualified to make that call? Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, some randomly appointed community of experts who even acknowledges that they're not even making that call. So that's the problem here. And just for the record, too, most of the time, the people affected by Facebook censorships are not high-profile people like Donald Trump. They're usually anti-war pages or Muslim communities or sex workers. Those are usually, the types of folks marginalized and censored by Facebook. So, it's time for real policy that meets the moment, not this weird, like non-transparent terms of services bullshit. We're in a weird moment where technology has passed up the law by miles. And if you want to see a really great statement about this entire thing, go to fightforthefuture.org. They sum it up perfectly. They say exactly what the problem is and what it's all about. And we'll probably be saying the same shit 4 years from now.
And there you go. First thing I agree with. These two guys don't know what they're talking about, and they probably will be complaining about the same shit 4 years from now. We're trying to do something. We're trying to oppose the system at the root and go in a fundamentally different direction as Marxists. These guys, this is a jerk-off session. This is stroking their egos and their fears, because I think, Jimmy is fueled here by a paranoia to, on the one hand, appeal to his right-leaning base. There's tons of MAGA and libertarian people in his audience base who he needs to keep those ad dollars flowing in. And on the other hand, and I think more fundamentally, he has this fear of being deplatformed. That's why he's always, Steven Crowder got kicked off of this and that. Steve Crowder's a piece of shit. And, Jimmy knows, I think deep down, he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. He's running these fast and loose political commentaries and that rely on quantity over quality. Probably is terrified every single day as to how it's all going to end up if he gets kicked off of YouTube. He's got a lot of years left to go. So who knows? But not a fan of this video. So far, I guess let's get back to it so we can get through with it.
Because nothing ever changes, and the same weak talking points are repeated uncritically. Boom.
Facebook is among NPR's financial supporters. And now you know the rest of the story. I guess we know who won't be getting censored on Facebook. That would be NPR and their misinformation. And then when they come out and are pro-war, they will not be censored on Facebook either. And when they smear a podcaster, NPR will not be censored either. When they repeat CIA talking points, NPR will not be censored. But the people who debunk them will be.
So I thought we were talking about Trump here because Trump doesn't do those things. Trump was literally president of the United States. I don't know what to tell you, except, again, you can see the utter lack of differentiation in this situation at all. I'm sure Jimmy, if he were here, would say you don't need to differentiate. And that's why his politics suck, to be honest.
And so you don't take away someone's access to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, just like you don't take away someone's telephone, because now they are the way we communicate in the modern world. You can't go take away. The Klan has access to telephones. Everybody gets that. Everybody gets clean water. Everybody gets electricity. Everybody should be able to be on social media because that is the town square now, and we all know it.
So again, at any point, is Jimmy going to mention why any of this is happening? My understanding is that Trump got kicked off because they're afraid he's going to incite more insurrections, which I guarantee you are not going to have good results. What Facebook and NPR and all of these other interests are doing is maintaining U.S. imperialism. What Trump represents, I mean, his faction has, and his movement has been at the helm, at least of the political leadership at, the recent past of that imperial institution of the U.S. government. So, I mean, he is a part of that system. But he also represents something which is itself representative of a system in crisis. When you have to create the kind of movement and sculpt the kind of movement that Trump is the de facto ruler of, that MAGA Tea Party birther thing. A system which needs to maintain something like that is a system in severe distress. Again, Jimmy is sidestepping all of this and just trying to make it out like Trump is just some guy with opinions. Couldn't be more wrong. This is very misleading what Jimmy is doing for his audience right now.
But it's the way for the oligarchs to control the narrative, which they have lost now, because people like us get to go on social media and communicate with people, and they've got to shut that down.
So again, we are talking about Trump. Do you want Trump to pick up that narrative? Do you want Trump, who we know, this isn't speculation, we've seen Trump in power, what they do with power. We have observed their behavior on social media, etc. We know what those people do with influence, power, and authority when they have it. Do you want them picking up the ball and running with it? Is that, are you willing on these principles of free speech to accept the consequences of that? I'm not saying that the empire is censoring Trump on behalf of you and me out of a genuine, sincere interest in our well-being in and of itself. They're interested in maintaining their rulership. So, like I've been saying through this whole video, that's why they're doing it. But keep in mind, we are talking about Trump. If you, out of this free speech absolutism, just this isolated, pure ideal of free speech, if you, in your quest for that, wind up unleashing Trump back on us again, are you cool with that? I mean, do you want that? Put aside the empire for a moment. Just think about Trump gaining more power and influence. Do you think that's a good thing or not? Given what we know he just did with it and likely will do again. Where does that take us? The empire is not a good thing, not in favor of it. Trump isn't going to fundamentally change that. He's just going to do it his style. And that's going to have, it will be nasty. But the bottom line is this. The bourgeoisie has decided they don't want to use the Trump implement on us currently. So they're trying to shelve it. That's what's going on. Any attempt to interpret this in a free speech absolutist lens is noise and distraction. At best, unless it's just out and out advocacy for, yeah, Trump's against the establishment, so I'm with him. Getting hard to tell the difference here. Continuing.
And they used Alex Jones as the boogeyman, and now they're using Trump as the boogeyman. But who really gets censored? Well, the people like us get censored. People who are anti-war get censored. Socialists get censored. Anybody who has a counter-narrative to the establishment gets censored.
So again, wrong. These are different things for different reasons. They're not equivalent. Jimmy Dore just keeps repeating himself here. I feel like, I want to apologize for being repetitive. I'm just replying to a very repetitive video. He's not saying a lot in here. It's the same bad points over and over again, just beating it into your head. This is not correct, what he's saying. They're not equivalent, and they don't repress socialists and Trumpers for the same reason. Trumpers serve a role to them. Marxists will end their system. We don't serve a role for them. Jimmy Dore here working overtime to try to convince you as a socialist that your interests on this issue, or really any issue, align with those of the Trumpers is doing a disservice here. Does he know he's doing it, or is he just a buffoon and a clown?
And they have to use Donald Trump as the boogeyman to scare you to say it's okay. Here's Huffington Post covering it. Facebook's board decision on Trump's ban could have wider impacts. What do they say? They say Facebook set the rules, our judge, jury, and executioner, and control their own appeals court and their own Supreme Court. The decisions they make have an impact on our democracies, national security, and biosecurity, and cannot be left to their own theater of the absurd, said Imran Ahmed, Center for Countering Digital Hate CEO. What? Wow. Gautam Hans, a technology law and free speech expert and professor at Vanderbilt University, said he finds the oversight board structure to be a sideshow from the larger policy and social questions that we have about these companies. In other words, this board is a complete bullshit gesture.
So again, that last comment displays Jimmy's limited intellect. That's not what I made out of that quote. When you call this oversight board structure a sideshow from the larger policy and social questions, that doesn't just mean that it's, quote, bullshit. It means that this whole problem needs to be approached in a different way. And the way Jimmy seems to be proposing that we approach it, of just free speech absolutism, is not that way. Because again, Jimmy is very conspicuously omitting. Trump didn't just say a bad thing. He says bad things. He led an insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. If you think that the system is going to tolerate that, I don't know why you would think that. Really, I don't. Whatever you think of the system's policies, I don't know why you would think it would tolerate that, really, under any circumstances. So the whole thing is cast by Jimmy here. Really, there's way too much of this video left, and nothing is being said. But he's cast this whole video in the wrong framing by omitting a crucial detail and just winding up his audience in a shoddily constructed house of cards.
That's what he's saying.
Well, it's a gesture to get away from the real issue, and the real issue is that we need to have new policy that requires these entities to follow the free speech laws of the United States.
They are following the free speech laws of the United States. Do people pay for this?
To some degree, Facebook is trying to create an accountability mechanism that I think undermines efforts to have government regulation and legislation. Bingo. If any other company decided, well, we're just going to outsource our decision-making to some quasi-independent body, that would be thought of as ridiculous. So there you go. And I'm sure the Young Turks are thrilled about this and all the other shit libs. I'm sure Chris Cuomo's happy about this. And anybody with an MSNBC contract is all for it, even as they're being suppressed. Oh, they're not. People on the corporate algorithm, the Young Turks on the corporate algorithm. MSNBC shows are not on the corporate algorithm. If you're on the Peacock network, you're not on you're on the corporate algorithm. So so there you go. I can't wait to go over to the Young Turks and watch their shit video on this. I cannot wait. This is the thing they've been cheering for. They've been cheering for fucking censorship by oligarchs forever. That's what they're all about. They love censorship at the Young Turks, and they want that. They want the Jeff Zuckerberg and they want Jack Dorsey to be able to unilaterally just censor anybody without any due process at any time, which is the equivalent in 2021 of canceling someone's telephone. That's the kind of shit show the Young Turks have turned into, which is why no one watches that show anymore. They'll drop videos that get like 5,000 views. If I did that, I would have to completely shut down my operation and reevaluate. Or I'd have to go get $24 million in corporate cash to stay afloat. But anyway, there you go. That's the... Ron, how much worse do you think this censorship's going to get before people start pushing back? What do you think has to happen? What do you think has to happen?
Well, what I think has to happen, and I know it's a tall order, but I think anything else is not enough. I think we need to pass a real digital Bill of Rights, and it needs to include specific policies on how social media companies have to behave and what laws have to be followed. I think some antitrust legislation would help too, because these companies are just way too powerful. Facebook, Google, you name it, they're just way too big, way too freaking powerful. And I think it needs to include net neutrality, which isn't, the same issue, but it is kind of, adjacent. And I think it also needs to include accessibility issues, too, because you're talking about the telephone. We have not reached the point where the internet is treated like a utility the way phone service is. And that's where we need to go. I mean, we're at a moment now. There was a point in history where electricity was kind of something that only so many people had great access to and everyone else not so much. And then they changed that. There are actually still places in the United States that are underserved when it comes to electricity, which is hard to imagine, but is real. But it's a lot better than it was. We need to get the internet up to that point.
Okay, kudos to Ron Placone there. I didn't agree with what he said, but it was at least on a slightly higher intellectual level. I will still disagree with it. So I had a few points here. First of all, just puttering around, saying very little. I love just ironic, when they're like, bingo, just acting like they hit the jackpot on such like a, nowhere near the point, just sort of lukewarm analysis. So let's go through this. Thinking that Facebook isn't doing this on behalf of the empire. The same people that these clowns are looking to re-regulate, Facebook or whatever. This is the basic error. I have been saying this in different ways in the video. Let me just boil it down here. Who is telling Facebook to do this? Who is pressuring Facebook to do this? Who is Facebook? This is the ruling class. These two guys you're looking at on the screen here somehow have come under the way of thinking that the bourgeois state, the same, represents the same interests, who are trying to put the MAGA movement back on the shelf until they need them again. In other words, the people who told Facebook to get Trump, the former president, off of Facebook, thinking that they are going to change the laws so that Facebook can't do that or something. I don't know what you're on, but this is not the product of, this is your brain on liberalism, kids. It's not good. It's not pretty. You'll wind up like these guys. Moving on from that, I feel like I've just beaten it to death. I'm sure there's people for whom it is still not clear. Leave me a comment. We'll explain it again. Moving on to being better than TYT. Okay. Now, people could say, well, S4A, aren't you just showing that, comparing yourself to Jimmy Dore? I mean, I'll tell you why I'm doing this video. In fact, I don't like watching Jimmy Dore. When I look at my analytics, a lot of listeners of S4A also listen to a lot of Jimmy Dore. So clearly people still need to be reached. That's why I'm doing it. I listen to the audience. I do things I'm interested in. And I also do sometimes sort of go to where the audience lives. And unfortunately, people do need some help with these topics, but hey, we'll do it. Finally, the last point, what Ron was saying there about the internet as a public utility. Well, let's take a minute to separate this out. Facebook is not the internet. There are countries, not the United States, what we're talking about, where most people like access things through Facebook first and foremost. Separate issue, and we're not going to go there. That's not what we're talking about today. But talking about internet, the same way, internet that for service, the same way that we talk about phone service or electricity, is different from talking about access to Facebook, having a Facebook account, etc. As I have said before, I have never had a personal Facebook account. My life is just fine. Thank you. I would rather not put all of my pictures of myself and my relatives and whatever else up and tag them with their faces and just feed them into the artificial intelligence system that is, you know, like basically the new de facto ruler and brain of the ruling class. I don't want to feed Brainiac in that way. And I get along just fine not doing that. So it can be done, is the point, really without any harm. I never sit there and go, gee, I wish I was on Facebook. I don't want to be on Facebook. It's watching you. Continuing, if the real complaint here is Facebook censoring sex workers and socialists and the other people who both these guys have listed, then fucking cover that. You're covering Trump getting kicked off, about which, again, I've laid out what I think the dynamics are. It's the empire shelving one of its weapons again. They are not using Trump right now. They want to do the Biden approach, so that's what they're doing. And they have locked up their dangerous weapons to be taken out at another time. You can't lump these in together. You can't analyze them in the same way. But that's what they're trying to do. But regardless, if you'd like to analyze the people on the left, ostensibly the same progressives who align with you, although I really question that increasingly in Jimmy Dore's case. Well, I don't even know increasingly. It was increasingly for a while. I think I've just reached the point where I'm like, he is deliberately pandering to the right wing, period. And I think his politics are not good and in many cases not very progressive. But, you know, you want to cover left suppression by Facebook, cover it. Cover it. You're not covering it in this video. You're covering Trump.
Tennessee Valley Authority was right. Wasn't that I think that was the FDR brought it to rural places, all that stuff. So anyway, yeah, I mean, we see it as you either see it as a utility or you don't. And
right.
It is. Obviously, the internet is something that you can't live in the world without anymore. Yeah, everything runs by email and this and that, and everything does. And so, I mean, even to get your vaccines, you got to sign up on the internet. You got
public service announcement. No, you can do that by phone as well. Don't give out vaccine misinformation. That's not a good thing to do.
The whole thing, right? So everyone knows the internet is just as essential as telephones were 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're an essential. You can't live in the society without them. They're a utility. And so you shouldn't be allowed to take that away from someone without an adversarial process.
Okay, so we're heading into the conclusion of the video, and the goalposts are now a mile away. We were talking about Facebook and Trump, and now we're talking about access to the internet. That actually had nothing to do with this conversation whatsoever. They just changed it to make it about that. Accessing the internet and the whatever billions of websites that are on it is a really different thing from accessing Facebook.com, which is one particular website, granted with a lot of content, but it is a website, not the internet. If this is the conclusion of the video, I really pity the people who watched this thing expecting quality content and information and analysis.
Meaning a judge. And I remember when I was arguing this at the Young Turks. The Young Turks are like, really? So every time they want to ban someone, they have to have a court case? Yes! Every time you want to take away someone's free speech, you have to go to court? Yes!
Okay, what is this maniac talking about? I'm going to take away Jimmy's free speech if he keeps spouting this crap. This is, as we've covered before, a fundamental misunderstanding of what free speech means. The First Amendment applies to what the government can do. Facebook, not being the government, is not covered by that. They're a private enterprise, and they have the authority to set their own terms of service, etc. They are not the internet. They are a website that has managed to, pull a lot of content onto it. You can actually get through life quite well without it. And I don't know what else to say. This is just piss poor commentary.
Every time you want to put someone in jail, you have to have a court case, Jimmy? Yes!
Does Facebook have jails now? I know we have like private prisons and stuff, but does Facebook own them? Like, what is he talking about? Log off. This is someone who spends entirely too much time online, and I don't even know what to say. This is deranged. These are not the same. I feel like I shouldn't even be dignifying this with commentary, but these are not the same. I don't know who needs to hear that these aren't the same. Like, who needs external encouragement and instruction on this point? Throw this away.
I mean, every time you want to take away someone's constitutional rights, you have to have a court case? Yes! That's how they think at the Young Turks. That's how they don't think. And that's how all the shit libs don't think. So I applaud your decision to stop watching that show and to come here and to come to this show and get better information from a pothead.
Yeah, so it's not better, actually. First of all, I love how he didn't even put the Young Turks in this video. So coming back to the title of this video, now mercifully over, Trump Facebook ban stands as liberals cheer it on, or whatever it says. Who are the liberals in this story? NPR? They covered it fairly neutrally, actually. And NPR, I mean, they're liberal in the pro-capitalism sense. They're not left liberal in that sense. Anyway, junk. And again, I love how Jimmy's always stressing like what a big moron and pothead he is. It shows. That's all I can really say. Nothing against cannabis use in moderation, I guess, but like it's not a personality. Anyway, this is just going into weird territory now. Gonna sign off and try to cleanse my brain of this experience. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. We appreciate your support. If you want to get your name on the screen, go to patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. If that is not your thing, liking, sharing, and subscribing, as well as commenting, the traditional means of support, are useful as always. So we appreciate that, especially on Facebook, because we're not on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, if you can get into some of the socialist and communist and leftist groups while you can, they are getting kicked off of Facebook, then use it, because we're in a class war. And let's use the resources available to us while they are available. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you in the next video.